The air is thick with the scent of burning wood and the acrid stench of iron. The sun has long disappeared, and the chill of the night seeps into every crack of the castle's ancient walls. A dull, rhythmic thud echoes through the fortress, vibrating the stones that have stood for centuries, witnessing the rise and fall of kings, the birth and death of entire lineages. The sound comes from a battering ram, its heavy, iron-tipped head pounding relentlessly against the gates, like the heartbeat of an empire on its last breath. A fire crackles in a distant hearth, casting long shadows along the damp stone corridors. It smells faintly of burning pitch, a smell that had become all too familiar in these final days. Inside, the knights are weary, their faces etched with the grim knowledge that their fate is sealed. The castle's defenders, once proud and numerous, are now reduced to a ragtag few. The men move quietly between the walls, their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust and old straw that have accumulated in the corners of the chambers. Once, this fortress stood as a symbol of power, a seat of a noble family that had weathered wars, plagues, and betrayals. Now it feels more like a tomb, each room filled with the echoes of a past life that is slipping away minute by minute. In the heart of the castle, standing alone in a chamber once adorned with tapestries of gold and crimson, an old knight surveys the crumbling remains of his former glory. His name is Lost to Time, a man whose story has long since been forgotten by all but the crows that circle overhead. His armor is battered, his once brilliant surcoat now stained with the grime of weeks without rest. His hair, once the color of silver moonlight, is now streaked with the ashen grays of age, his face sagging with the weight of memories too heavy to bear. He feels the cold draft of the night through the cracks in the stone, and it seems to seep into his bones, making them ache. He moves to the narrow window and looks out over the courtyard, his eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy is not far. He can hear their war cries, muffled by the wind, carried across the valley. Soon they will come, and the walls that he and his comrades have sworn to defend will collapse under the weight of their siege. The gates will fall. The walls, though thick and weathered by time, will not be enough to hold back the tide of men who come to claim the castle for their own. The knight has seen it all before. He has fought in countless battles, his sword cleaving through the air as though it were an extension of his very soul. He remembers the first time he held a sword, how it felt like a promise, a bond forged between him and the land he vowed to protect. That was long ago, in a time when hope was a tangible thing, when the clanging of steel against steel was still a symphony of courage and honor. But now, the battlefield has changed. The blood that once flowed in the name of glory now flows to the rhythm of desperation and fear. His hand falls to the hilt of his sword, the familiar weight grounding him in the present. It is a relic, its steel scarred from years of use. He does not need to look at it to know its every curve, its every nick and mark. It has been his companion through decades of war and peace alike. But now, it feels like a shackle, a reminder of his duty that he cannot escape. The castle is not just stone and mortar. It is a living thing, a part of his soul, and the thought of its destruction weighs heavily on his heart. There is a silence in the air that presses in on him, a quiet that is too thick to be natural. It is a silence of inevitability, the silence before the storm. He knows what is coming, and yet there is a part of him that hopes, foolish as it may be, that somehow, against all odds, the castle will hold. But hope, like the sun that fades from the sky, is a fleeting thing. The knight turns away from the window and walks through the corridors, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He passes to the great hall, where once knights sat in festivity, drinking mead and singing songs of their victories. Now, the hall is empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire. The tapestries, once rich with color, now hang limp against the walls, faded and torn. There is a sadness in the air, a sense of finality that is palpable. The smell of stale food and damp stone is overpowering, mixing with the scent of burnt wood that drifts in from the outer courtyard. At the far end of the hall, a lone figure stands near the hearth, her hands clasped tightly around a small bundle of cloth. It is the lady of the castle, her face drawn with the weight of the siege. She is younger than the knight, though her face bears the marks of the same hardships. She has spent her days tending to the wounded, overseeing the soldiers, and keeping the fires of hope alive even as the walls close in around them. Her eyes meet the knight's, and for a moment there is a silent understanding between them, an acknowledgement of what is to come. The lady nods, as though sensing the knight's resolve. "We must hold," she says, her voice strong but weary. "We must not let them take what is ours." The knight does not reply. There is no need for words. He knows that she, too, feels the weight of the past pressing on her shoulders. She, like him, is the last of a dying line, the last to hold the memory of their ancestors close. The lady walks toward him, her step silent on the stone floor. She places her hand on his arm, a gesture of both strength and surrender. Her eyes are filled with sorrow, but also with a determination that mirrors his own. The knight's heart aches, but he nods in return. They both know the castle will fall. There is no escape, no last-minute reinforcements to save them. The siege has lasted too long, and the enemy is too many. And yet they will fight. They will fight, because it is the only thing left to do. The knight stands tall, his gaze fixed on the courtyard, where the enemy's siege engines loom monstrous in the twilight. Their shadow stretches long across the ground, like the inevitable hand of death reaching toward them. A horn sounds in the distance, and the knight's grip tightens on his sword. It is a signal that the enemy is making their final assault. The great wooden doors groan under the force of the battering ram's relentless blows, and the sound is like the roar of a beast. The lady turns and walks toward the gates, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She knows what will happen next. The castle will fall, but the fight will not be without honor. As the first wave of enemy soldiers begins to flood to the shattered gates, the knight steps forward, his sword drawn. The battle is fierce and chaotic, the clash of metal against metal filling the air. The knight fights not for glory, not for victory, but for the memory of what this castle once was, a symbol of power, of resilience, of history. With every strike, every parry, he knows that the castle is slipping further and further into oblivion, but he fights anyway, because it is all that is left. The lady fights beside him, her sword flashing in the torchlight as she defends her home with every ounce of strength she has left. The enemy presses in from all sides, but the defenders, though outnumbered, stand firm. The knight and the lady share a brief glance, a silent exchange of understanding. There is no turning back now. The castle's fate is sealed. As the enemy surges forward, the knight knows that this is the end. The walls, once impregnable, have fallen. The gates have been breached. The last stand has come. But even as the walls crumble around them, the knight holds firm. He fights for those who can no longer fight, for those who will never be remembered, for the castle that once was. And when the last of the defenders falls, when the castle has been claimed by the enemy, there is a moment of silence. The battlefield is littered with bodies, some of them knights, some of them farmers, but all of them the same in death. The knight, now lying amidst the ruins, feels the final breath of the castle slip away with him. His eyes close, and in that moment, he knows that even though the castle has fallen, its memory will live on in the hearts of those who fought to protect it. The wind picks up again, howling through broken towers, carrying with it the echoes of a story now lost to time. The castle falls, but the knight's legacy, though forgotten by history, will remain a whisper in the winds of war, carried on the breath of the earth, waiting to be remembered by those who still listen. The sky above the besieged castle is a pale, lifeless gray, heavy with the weight of an impending storm. A thin drizzle falls steadily, clinging to the stone walls like a shroud of despair. It is a quiet sort of rain, the kind that numbs the bones and slows the mind. The air smells of wet earth, of damp woolen cloaks and rusting iron, of the kind of ancient decay that only comes with the slow, relentless passage of time. Beneath the wet, cold heavens, the castle stands tall, its once proud towers now battered and crumbling. The banners that once fluttered high in the wind hang limp, soaked and forgotten. The heavy thud of siege engines, the groaning of wooden beams, fills the air, but it is a silence that pervades the castle's heart, a silence of waiting, of knowing that the end is inevitable. At the heart of this fortress, within the thick stone walls, stands Lady Aloan, the last of her line, the last of a family that had ruled over this land for generations. Her father, the Duke, lies dying in the chamber above, a victim of illness and the endless stress of a siege that has dragged on for far too long. Her mother, the Duchess, passed away years ago, leaving Iloan with the unrelenting weight of leadership at a young age. She is not a warrior. She has never been trained in swordplay, never stood on the battlefield. Yet here, in the face of certain defeat, she stands resolute, her chin high, her heart a furnace of defiance, her eyes dark and steady, skim the walls of the keep, her hands clasped tightly before her. She is a woman of rare beauty, but it is the strength of her resolve that radiates most. Her deep auburn hair, usually cascading in curls down her back, is now swept up in a tight knot, strands escaping to frame her face. Her face, pale with the stress of the siege, is streaked with the grime of days spent in the war room, among maps and strategy, and among the men who have been her protectors. The scent of lavender, once her mother's favorite fragrance, now clings faintly to her skin, a reminder of better days, of a time when this castle had been a place of peace, a sanctuary for the family it had housed for centuries. But now, peace is a forgotten dream. The castle's walls are shaking from the constant bombardment, and the ground trembles beneath her feet. The air is thick with the smell of burning pitch, the crackling sound of flames licking the walls from the courtyard below. She can hear the sound of enemy soldiers shouting outside, their voices muffled by the thick stone, but she knows they are coming. The castle will fall. It has been days since the last of their reinforcements were turned back, and the enemy has grown impatient. They are too many for the few defenders who remain loyal to her, who have fought without rest, without hope. Iloan steps away from the window, her eyes tracing the distant horizon, where the gray clouds meet the barren land. There is a softness in her gaze, a hint of longing for something she knows she cannot have. She looks at the courtyard below, where the last remnants of her father's banners flutter weakly in the wind, their fabric torn and faded. In the farthest corner, a few soldiers move about, repairing defenses that are already beyond saving. Their movements are slow, mechanical, as if they, too, have given up the fight in their hearts, even as their bodies continue to toil. Her thoughts turn inward, as they so often do now, to the people who relied on her to keep this place standing, to protect what remains of her father's legacy. She remembers the faces of the children who played in the castle courtyard, their laughter echoing off the stone walls, long before the siege began. She remembers the warmth of the hearths in the great hall, the smell of roasting meats, the sound of music and dancing, of life. But those days are gone. The cold has crept into every corner of this place, and the silence is no longer just the absence of sound, but the presence of loss. Her grip tightens on the cold, polished stone of the window ledge. She cannot help but think of the lives that will be lost when the castle falls. Her people, her soldiers, her friends. She has heard their voices in the halls, speaking in hushed tones, trying to comfort one another as best they can. She has seen the weariness in their eyes, the exhaustion that comes with days of constant defense. The soldiers do not speak retreat, not out loud, for fear of dishonoring the legacy of their lord and lady, but in their hearts, they know what will happen. The walls are breached. The gates are cracked. There is no longer any hope for salvation. Iloan moves slowly toward the great hall, her footsteps echoing in the hollow emptiness. She passes to the corridors that have seen so much history, once vibrant with laughter and life, now cold and barren. The tapestries that once adorned the walls, showing images of valor and triumph, are now torn, their colors faded and dim. She runs her fingers lightly over the stone, feeling its rough texture beneath her fingertips, and for a moment, she is lost in the memory of a time long past, a time when her father still ruled and the future seemed limitless. As she enters the great hall, she is met by her captain, Sir Gareth, a veteran of many battles, a man who has stood by her father's side for years. He is standing near the fire, staring into the embers as if seeking something in the crackling flames. He turns when he hears her approach, his face grim, his eyes betraying the toll the siege has taken on him. The scent of iron and sweat clings to him, and his armor is battered, dented from days of combat. "My lady," he says, bowing low. There is no honor left in the gesture, only the tired recognition of what is to come. Iloan raises a hand to stop him. "How many are left, Sir Gareth?" Her voice is steady, but there is an edge to it, a sharpness that speaks of a strength she is trying to keep in check. He hesitates, his eyes flickering to the door as if seeking an answer from the wind. Not many, my lady. The gates are broken. The outer walls are nearly gone. We have a few dozen left, but the enemy, they are countless. He pauses, then adds, almost as an afterthought, there is no hope. Iloan nods slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She knew this already, but hearing it spoken aloud makes it all the more real. Then we shall make our stand here, she says, her voice cold with resolve. We will not run. We will not surrender. Sir Gareth looks at her, and for a moment there is a flicker of admiration in his eyes. He knows that the lady is not just speaking for herself, but for everyone in the castle, for every life that has been lost in this war. As you wish, my lady, he says, his tone softening. I will make the necessary preparations. Iloan turns and walks toward the high table, where the maps of surrounding land have been spread out. She studies them for a long moment, tracing her fingers over the contours of the land that was once her family's. She feels a pang in her chest, a deep sorrow for what has been lost, not just in her castle, but in her own soul. Her life will never be the same again. The kingdom her father once ruled is slipping away, piece by piece, as the enemy grows ever closer. The silence in the hall is broken by the sound of footsteps, soldiers entering, preparing for the final battle. They gather in a silent formation, their faces hard, their gazes determined. The scent of steel and sweat fills the air as they adjust their armor, their swords heavy at their sides. Iloan stands at the center of the room, a silent sentinel, watching her people prepare to meet their fate. Outside, the first of the enemy forces crash against the gates. The sound of their war cries fills the air, mingling with the deep thud of battering rams and the crackling of fire. The castle shakes with the force of the onslaught, and Iloan closes her eyes for a moment, feeling the deep, rumbling tremor that reverberates through her very bones. It is a sound of finality. The walls that have protected her family for centuries are no longer enough to stand against the tide of war. With a deep breath, Iloan stands taller, her resolve hardening. To the gates, she says, her voice cutting through the air. We will make them pay for every inch. As the soldiers march toward the gates, Iloan follows, her heart heavy, but her soul resolute. The castle will fall, but she will face its demise with dignity, with courage. She will not be remembered as a woman who fled when things grew dark. She will be remembered as a lady who fought until the very end, for her people, for her land, for the legacy of a house that will never truly die. The wind howls across the battlefield, carrying with it the acrid scent of smoke, the tang of blood, and the heavy weight of impending doom. The once gleaming spires of the castle now stand tarnished by years of war, their stone faces weathered and cracked. It is a lonely sight, this fortress, proud in its prime, now reduced to shadow of itself, its glory faded with each passing hour. The walls, once considered impenetrable, had begun to tremble under the relentless assault of the enemy's siege engines. A single, distant thunderclap reverberates through the air, signaling the arrival of yet another barrage. The siege has been relentless, its echoes an unbroken rhythm in the castle's battered heart. At the top of the highest tower, a young lord stands alone, his back straight, his hands gripping the cold stone of the battlements. His name is Lord Aldrich, and though he has inherited the lands of his ancestors, his youth betrays him. Barely past his 20th year, his face is still soft with the traces of childhood. A far cry from the hardened faces of the soldiers who stand guard below. But there's an intensity in his eyes, a weight that belies his age. It is the weight of responsibility, of a legacy that has been handed down to him at a time when the world seems to be crumbling. His armor is dented, streaked with the grime of battle and weeks without rest. His once bright surcoat, bearing the crest of his house, a proud lion set against a backdrop of silver, now hangs limp and stained, no longer a symbol of power, but of desperate survival. His sword, a family heirloom passed down through generations, is sheathed at his side. It has seen too many battles, too many deaths. He can feel its weight even when it is not drawn. The castle walls seem to stretch forever beneath him, the stones whispering of days gone by, of his ancestors who once stood on this very spot, looking down at the land they rule with pride. Those days are fading fast. Soon, these walls will crumble, and with them, the last remnants of his family's reign. Aldrich exhales slowly, his breath fogging the cold air. He stares out the horizon, his gaze fixed on the approaching enemy. They are too many. He can see the glint of armor, the sway of banners in the wind. The army is vast, a dark, churning mass that threatens to swallow everything in its path. Their numbers are uncountable. And yet here he stands, alone, poised at the edge of history, a young man who has never known true war, but who is about to learn its cruelest lessons. The Lord is no stranger to the sounds of battle, the clash of swords, the groan of siege engines, the screams of the wounded. But it is the silence that follows these sounds that haunts him most. It is the silence of inevitability, the silence that fills the space between every blow, between every desperate charge. He knows what is coming. His people have held the walls for weeks, their resolve unbroken, their spirits still burning with the light of resistance. But he knows this is the final assault. The walls, no matter how thick, will not hold forever. The castle will fall. The land will fall. And he, Lord Aldrich, will fall with it. He thinks of his father, his strong, commanding father, who had led this castle with iron will and wisdom. His death had been swift, unexpected, and left Aldrich with a mantle too heavy to bear. He had never been prepared for this. The weight of leadership had come too early. His father's counselors had whispered that the Lord was too young to defend such a critical stronghold, but Aldrich had insisted on remaining. His pride, his honor, demanded it. And now, standing in the shadows of the same stones that once sheltered his ancestors, he feels the crushing weight of that decision. The siege had begun weeks ago, at first with minor skirmishes, the distant hum of arrows and the faint rumble of catapults on the horizon. But then, as the days turned into weeks, the sound of battle became all-consuming, a constant backdrop to life within the castle. The larder grew empty. The fires in the hearth struggled to stay lit against the damp of the siege. The men, his men, grew weaker by the day. They were not just fighting an army. They were fighting time, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of hope. And all the while, Lord Aldrich stood, watching, commanding, trying desperately to hold together the fraying edges of his house's legacy. It is in moments like this, as the wind stirs the banners that flutter weakly from the battlements, that he wishes for a different fate, a life without the weight of responsibility, a life where his heart is not consumed by the flames of duty and honor. But those are fantasies, and reality presses on him with all the weight of the stone walls around him. A familiar voice breaks through his reverie, pulling him back to present. "My lord," a young squire says, bowing low, "the walls, they will not hold much longer. We've already lost the east gate. The enemy is preparing to charge." Aldrich turns, his brow furrowing. "And the men?" The squire hesitates. "They're preparing as best they can, my lord. But morale is weakening. Many are asking for orders to retreat." Aldrich feels his chest tighten at the word. Retreat. A bitter taste rises in his throat. Retreat. He repeats the word softly, as if trying to make sense of it. There is no retreat. Not while the castle still stands. Not while there is breath in his body. He strides toward the stairway, his boots echoing on the stone as he descends into the heart of the castle. The sounds of preparation fill the air, men gathering their swords, adjusting their armor, the sound of 100 soldiers preparing for their final fight. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation, fear, and the desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, they will survive. In the courtyard, the soldiers form ranks, their eyes steely with resolve, but their faces show the toll of the siege. Aldrich walks among them, his gaze sweeping over the men he has known since childhood. Men who have sworn their lives to his family, men who would die for him without question. He stops before one such man, a grizzled veteran with a scar running down his face. "Sir Raelin," Aldrich says, his voice firm, "what is the status of the defenses?" Raelin gives a grim smile. "The walls are breached, my lord. The east gate is gone. The north wall will fall within the hour. We've little left to defend." Aldrich nods slowly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Then we fight. We fight to the last. We'll make them pay for every inch of this castle." The men around him murmur their assent. Their voices a low rumble of determination. They are tired, they are broken, but they are not yet defeated. They still have their honor. And for a moment, Aldrich feels a flicker of hope. Perhaps, if they can hold long enough, reinforcements will come. Perhaps a miracle is not beyond reach. But as the battle horns sound in the distance, the reality of the situation begins to settle back in. The castle is surrounded. There is no escape, no reinforcements, no salvation. The siege engines, with their long, groaning arms, release their final barrage, and the walls shake under the impact. Aldrich feels the earth tremble beneath him as the enemy's heavy artillery begins to break through the last of the outer defenses. The ground trembles, and he knows that the end is near. His soldiers, grim and resolute, take their places at the gates, bracing for the inevitable wave of enemy soldiers. In the final moments before the gates fall, Aldrich stands in the courtyard, his sword drawn, his mind sharp with the knowledge that this will be the last battle of his life. The soldiers around him are ready, standing in grim silence, waiting for the order to charge. He knows they will die here, just as he will. But as the first wave of enemy soldiers crashes through the gates, his resolve hardens. He will not let his family's name fade in disgrace. Not here, not today. The battle is chaos. Steel against steel, screams of pain, the sickening thud of arrows finding their mark. Aldrich fights with every ounce of strength he has left, his sword flashing in the torchlight as he cuts through the enemy's ranks. His movements are precise, practiced. He has been training for this moment all his life. But no matter how fiercely he fights, the walls around him crumble, and the castle, once a symbol of power, now becomes his tomb. As the castle's gates fall and the final blow is struck, Aldrich knows that he has done all he could. His last thoughts are not of victory, but of the land, his family's legacy, and the men who fought beside him. The castle has fallen, but the flame of their defiance will burn long after the walls have crumbled into dust. The light of the dying sun casts long shadows across the desolate landscape. The once vibrant hills surrounding the castle now lie barren, the fields charred by months of conflict, the grass withered beneath the weight of war. The distant rumble of siege engines fills the air, their massive stones crashing against the castle's defenses like thunder in a storm. The stench of burning timber, the acrid scent of pitch, and the sharp tang of iron fill the air, mingling with the ever-present fog of dust and smoke. The castle, a grand monument to generations of power and wealth, now stands on the edge of collapse, its ancient stones battered and cracked under the relentless assault. Within the walls, the atmosphere is suffocating. The once proud banners of the ruling family now hang limp and torn, barely recognizable against the darkening sky. The sounds of life, laughter, music, and the bustling court are now memories, echoes fading into the past. The air is thick with tension, a palpable feeling of dread that seeps into every corner of the fortress. The servants move quietly through the halls, their faces pale and weary, as though the very walls of the castle have absorbed their strength and hope. Lady Seraphina stands in the heart of the keep, her hands trembling as they grip the worn hilt of her father's sword. The weapon feels too heavy for her delicate hands, yet it is a symbol of her family's legacy, a legacy that is slipping away with each passing hour. Her once beautiful gown, now torn and stained from days of work, hangs loosely on her frail frame. Her auburn hair, usually elegantly arranged, is now tangled and wild, falling in disarray around her shoulders. She is not a warrior, and she knows it, but she has had little choice in the matter. Her father, the Duke, is dead, struck down by illness just weeks before the siege began. Her mother, too, passed away years ago, leaving Seraphina alone to shoulder the weight of a castle and a people who looked to her for leadership. The knights, once loyal to her father, now serve her in name only. The council of advisors, some of whom have served her family for decades, have grown silent in their uncertainty. Seraphina has taken to the battlefield, not because she desires it, but because there is no one left to lead. Her heart aches for her father, for the loss of the life she once knew, but her duty to her people runs deeper than her grief. She cannot abandon them, not when their very survival depends on the strength of the castle's walls and the strength of her resolve. She turns away from the window, her gaze sweeping over the inner courtyard, where the last of the defenders prepare for the final battle. The knights move in disciplined formations, their swords glinting in the fading light. They are brave men, stalwart in their determination, but Seraphina knows that bravery alone will not be enough. The enemy is too many, their forces overwhelming. The siege has been long, and hope is a distant memory. She can already hear the distant cries of the enemy soldiers outside the walls. Their voice is a constant reminder that the end is near. A knock at the door breaks her thoughts, and she turns to find Sir Cedric, the captain of the guard, standing in the doorway. His face is grim, his brow furrowed in concentration, yet there's a flicker of concern in his eyes, a concern that is rare for a man of his stoic nature. "My lady," he begins, his voice low and steady, "the gates have been breached. The enemy will enter the castle within the hour." Seraphina's heart tightens at the words. She has known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud makes it all the more real. She had hoped, foolishly, for a miracle, that somehow the castle would hold, or that reinforcements would arrive in time. But the reality is harsh. The castle will fall, and with it, the last remnants of her family's rule. She steps forward, her voice unwavering despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Then we will meet them at the gates. We will not give in, Sir Cedric, not without a fight." He bows his head, but his gaze lingers on her, a silent question in his eyes. She can see it, the doubt, the concern that perhaps she is too young, too inexperienced for what is to come. But Seraphina refuses to allow herself the luxury of fear. She is the last of her bloodline, and this is her inheritance. She will not go quietly into the night. As they move down the stone corridors, the air grows colder, the scent of dampness and decay heavier. The sounds of soldiers preparing for the final stand fill the air, the sharp clang of armor being fitted, the low murmurs of men steeling themselves for the inevitable. There is no celebration here, no final rallying cry. The soldiers know what is at stake. They know that, no matter how hard they fight, the outcome will be the same. The castle will fall, and they will either die or be captured. Seraphina reaches the inner courtyard, where the soldiers have gathered around the gates, their swords and shields at the ready. Sir Cedric is already in position, issuing commands with a steady, authoritative voice. The men stand in tight formation, their faces hard, their eyes focused on the gate, waiting for the inevitable. "My lady," Sir Cedric says, stepping forward, "you should stay inside. There is no need for you to risk your life." Seraphina looks at him, her eyes dark with determination. "I will not hide behind these walls, Sir Cedric. My people will see their lady standing beside them, fighting for our home." Her voice cracks slightly, but she presses on. "I will not be the one to abandon them." He nods, though there is a trace of sorrow in his gaze. He understands. There is no choice. She is their last hope, and she will not run, not while there is still breath in her body. The gates groan as the enemy begins to press against them, the weight of their siege engines pushing the castle to its breaking point. The defenders brace for impact, and Seraphina stands beside them, her heart pounding in her chest. The first of the enemy's soldiers emerge in the darkness, their armor glinting in the torchlight. They are a sea of faces, their numbers overwhelming. The roar of their voices fills the air, a wall of sound that crashes against the resolve of the defenders. The battle is brutal. Arrows rain down from the walls, and the clash of swords fills the air like a symphony of destruction. Seraphina fights beside the men she has known all her life, her sword cutting through the enemy ranks. She is not a soldier, but in this moment, she fights as if she has always been one. Her hands are trembling, but her resolve is unshakable. She will not let this castle fall without leaving her mark. As the battle rages on, she feels the first cracks of defeat. The enemy pushes forward, their numbers swarming over the castle's defenses like a flood. She sees her knights fall one by one, their bodies littering the ground like broken dolls. The smoke from the torches clings to the air, choking her lungs, but she refuses to stop. It is only when the enemy finally reaches the gates, when they break through and pour into the courtyard, that Seraphina knows the end has come. Her soldiers, though valiant, are outnumbered and exhausted. The last of the defenders fight with their backs to the walls, but they are too few, and the enemy is too many. Seraphina stands amidst the carnage, her sword raised, her gaze unwavering. She sees her men fall one by one, their bodies crumpling to the earth. She hears their cries of pain, but she cannot stop. Not yet. not while the castle still stands. But as a final wave of enemy soldiers surges forward, Seraphina knows that it is over. She feels the weight of her father's sword in her hands, its sharp edge glinting in the torchlight. She raises it high, ready to meet her fate. The last thing she hears is the roar of the enemy and the deafening clash of steel, and then the world goes dark. The storm clouds swirl above the fortress, dark and threatening, as if the heavens themselves had conspired against the defenders. The air is thick with moisture, a prelude to the downpour that will come in the hours ahead. The battlements, once a proud line of defense, now seem fragile, like teeth in a decayed jaw. The stones have been worn smooth by time and the constant battering of the enemy's siege engines. The very earth beneath the castle seems to tremble, as if the land itself knows that the end is near. The constant sound of rams crashing into gates, the distant echo of arrows whistling through the air, and the thunderous clatter of iron against iron fills the air, drowning out the silence of despair that has gripped the defenders' hearts. At the center of the castle stands Lord Roderick, his broad shoulders hunched beneath the weight of a crown that no longer fits. His hands, once steady and strong, now tremble slightly as they grasp the hilt of his sword. His face is drawn and weary, the lines of age and sorrow etched deep into his skin. The once resplendent banner of his house, a proud wolf against a field of gold, hangs limp and tattered in the wind, symbolizing the family's dwindling strength. The castle, which was meant to stand for eternity, now feels more like a tomb, its halls empty and hollow. Roderick's heart aches for what he is about to lose, but he cannot show weakness, not now. His people are watching him, waiting for him to give the order to stand and fight, to protect their way of life, their homes, their land. Roderick's father had built this castle with his own hands, stone by stone, brick by brick. It had been a symbol of strength, a sanctuary for the family and their allies. But now, the walls that once promised safety had become a prison, and the lands that once flourished under his family's rule have been reduced to barren fields, scarred by war. The enemy's siege has lasted far longer than anyone anticipated. They are relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Day after day, the enemy presses in, cutting off any hope of relief. There is no longer a sense of honor in the fight, only the cold reality of survival. Roderick's mind drifts back to the early days of the siege, when he first received word of the approaching enemy. At first, it had been a distant threat, something he could manage with a few well-placed defenses and a ready garrison. But soon, the reality set in. The enemy was stronger than he had thought, their tactics brutal and precise. The rams had been brought forward first, followed by the catapults and the battering of the gates. His knights, once numerous and proud, now number only a fraction of what they had been. Their swords are dull from overuse, their shields battered and splintered from weeks of constant assault. Their faces are gaunt, eyes hollow from the lack of sleep and food. Yet they fight on because they have no other choice. There is no hope of surrender, only death or victory. Roderick is drawn from his thoughts by the sound of footsteps approaching. His captain, Sir Gawain, a man as battle-hardened as they come, steps forward. His face is grim, his armor dulled by the grime of battle. But there's a fire in his eyes, a flicker of defiance that Roderick knows will burn out before the day is done. "My lord," Sir Gawain says, his voice low but steady, "the eastern wall is near collapse. The enemy has breached the outer gates. We cannot hold much longer." Roderick's heart sinks at the words. The eastern wall has been their last line of defense, the final barrier against the tide of men that now presses at their door. The thought of abandoning the wall, of letting it fall, is unthinkable, and yet the reality is inescapable. The castle is too small, too overwhelmed. The enemy is too many. "How long?" Roderick asks, his voice rough. "A few hours, my lord," Sir Gawain replies. "At best." Roderick takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He has led these men, these soldiers, for years. He has fought beside them, bled with them, and seen many victories. But this will not be one of those victories. This is the end of the line, and no amount of bravery will change that. "We will make our stand at the keep," Roderick says, his voice resolute despite the uncertainty gnawing at his insides. "Tell the men to rally there. We will not retreat." Sir Gawain nods, but there's a shadow in his eyes, a shadow that says what neither of them can admit aloud. This is no longer about winning. This is about dying with dignity, about holding on to the last shreds of pride that remain. Roderick turns toward the keep, his footsteps heavy against the stone, each step taking him closer to the inevitable. As he walks, memories flood his mind, memories of his youth, of the days when this castle was a place of warmth, of laughter, of life. He remembers the great feasts held in the hall, the music that would fill the air, the faces of friends and family gathered in celebration. But those days are gone. Now, there is nothing but the cold emptiness of the stone walls, the smoke rising from the burning lands outside, and the growing certainty that he will not survive this day. The courtyard is filled with soldiers, their faces weary and strained. They move in tight formations, preparing their weapons, their armor, their shields. The once gleaming armor of the knights now looks like rusted relics of another time, their edges dulled by the endless fighting. Roderick's gaze sweeps over them, his heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. These men, these loyal soldiers, are willing to die for him, but he knows that even their bravery will not be enough. The enemy is too many. At the head of the courtyard, the massive doors of the keep are already being reinforced, the last line of defense being bolstered by the few men who still have strength left to fight. The gates groan under the weight of the enemy's siege weapons, and the ground vibrates beneath Roderick's feet. He stands at the center of the courtyard, his sword drawn, his heart heavy with the knowledge that soon the gates will break and the walls will fall. But he will not run. He will not let the enemy take his home, his family's legacy, without a fight. He will die here, with his men, defending the land that has been his for as long as he can remember. He will die, but his name will be remembered. The sound of the battering ram grows louder, its rhythmic thud reverberating through the courtyard. The men around him tense, their hands gripping their weapons tighter, their eyes flicking to the gates, to the walls, to the enemy that waits just beyond. The air is thick with anticipation, with fear, but also with something else, something deeper. It is a resolve to fight, to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground they take. And then, with a deafening crash, the gates fall. The courtyard erupts into chaos. The enemy floods into the castle, a wave of bodies that crashes against the defenders. Steel clashes against steel, and the air fills with the sounds of men shouting, screaming, dying. Roderick is at the front, his sword a blur of motion as he fights with every ounce of strength he has left. His men fall around him, their bodies crumpling to the ground, but he does not stop. He cannot stop. The battle is brutal, chaotic, and short. The enemy is relentless, their numbers overwhelming. One by one, the defenders are cut down. Roderick feels the weight of his sword grow heavier with each passing moment, his limbs growing weaker, but he does not stop. Not yet. As the last of his men falls, Roderick stands alone in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen, both friend and foe. The enemy's soldiers close in, their weapons raised, their eyes cold with the certainty of victory. Roderick stands tall, his sword raised high, a symbol of defiance, of honor, even in the face of death. And then, with one final swing, the world goes dark. The horizon is a streak of blood red and purple, the fading light of the day casting a dark, mournful glow over the once proud fortress. The wind howls across the battlements, carrying with it the scent of smoke, of burning flesh and timber, and the oppressive stench of defeat. The distant sound of war drums reverberates through the land, an ominous reminder of the enemy that surrounds them, an endless, crushing tide of soldiers that will soon breach the castle's walls. Within the fortress, the atmosphere is suffocating, thick with the weight of impending doom. The walls, which once stood as symbols of power and pride, now feel brittle and frail, crumbling under the relentless assault. The distant echoes of siege engines pound against the gates, their impact reverberating through the stone like the thunderous steps of a titan. The once beautiful tapestries that adorn the halls now hang in tatters, their vibrant colors dulled by smoke and the passage of time. The air is stale, heavy with the scent of damp stone and the unmistakable tang of iron. There is no sound of laughter, no light of joy in these halls, only the heavy silence of dread. Lady Isolde, the last of her line, stands before the great hearth in the royal chamber, the flickering fire casting long shadows on her face. Her once pristine gown is torn and stained, her regal beauty now dimmed by exhaustion, sorrow, and the weight of the world on her shoulders. The golden crown that once graced her brow is nowhere to be found, lost somewhere between the moments of victory and defeat. Her long, raven black hair, which had once been carefully arranged by her maids, now hangs loose, tangled from days of worry, nights of sleeplessness, and the cruel pressure of the siege. Her eyes, dark as the night, reflect the despair of a kingdom slipping through her fingers. The people who once revered her family now whisper of her failure, of her inability to hold the walls, of the inevitable fall of her house. The lands that had once flourished beneath her father's rule, rich with fertile soil, golden harvest, and bustling trade, are now ravaged by war, the fields scorched, the towns reduced to ashes. The enemy, relentless and countless, has encircled them from all sides, their siege stretching on for weeks, the outer walls reduced to rubble, the gates splintered and breached. But it is not just the castle she grieves for. It is the loss of everything she has known, her family, her childhood, her kingdom. It is a realization that, despite all her efforts, she cannot save her people. She cannot stop the encroaching darkness that has already claimed the hearts of her soldiers, her counselors, and her loyal subjects. She had tried, of course. At the start of the siege, she had ordered her forces to defend, her heart filled with the hope that her father's bloodline, his legacy, would stand the test of time. She had ordered the gates to be shut and barred. She had rallied the knights and soldiers to the walls, and she had sent messengers to call for reinforcements. But the enemy's numbers were vast, their siege engines too powerful. The stone walls trembled beneath their bombardment, and the sound of their war cries grew louder with each passing day. The advisors, the men who had served her father, who had sworn their fealty to her, were the first to lose faith. They had begged her to surrender, to offer terms to the enemy, to save her people from the horrors of the coming onslaught. But Isolde could not bring herself to even consider it. To surrender would be to dishonor her family, to betray the memory of her ancestors. Her father had never been one to yield. His strength and wisdom had made him the most powerful ruler in the land. But that strength, that resolve, had not been passed down to her. And now, standing at the precipice of destruction, Isolde wonders whether her own failure will be the final blow to her house. She hears the footsteps before she sees him. Sir Alden, her captain of the guard, enters the room, his face drawn, his eyes weary from the constant fighting. His armor, once gleaming and polished, is now dull, battered by days of combat. His sword is sheathed, his shield scuffed with the marks of battle. Despite the exhaustion that weighs on him, there is still a fire in his eyes, a fierce loyalty that is not dimmed, even as their defenses fall. He stands tall before her, his posture straight, but there is something in his eyes that she does not like, a shadow of uncertainty, of dread. "My lady," he says, bowing low, his voice thick with the weight of the news he bears. The enemy breaches the final wall. The gates will fall within the hour. Isolde's heart stutters in her chest, the words piercing her like a blade. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it in her bones, but hearing it spoken aloud makes it all the more real. She cannot keep the castle, her family's legacy, her kingdom, any longer. "How many do we have left?" she whispers, her voice barely audible, as if speaking the words aloud will make the reality of it more bearable. Sir Alden hesitates for a moment, then answers, his voice heavy with sorrow. "There are fewer than 50 men remaining, my lady. Many of our soldiers have already fallen, and those still alive are too injured to fight. 50 men, a handful of souls, standing against an army that numbers in the thousands. The weight of it is suffocating. The futility of it is unbearable." She stands there for a long moment, staring at the fire, unable to find the words, unable to find the strength. The fire crackles in the hearth, the only sound in the room, and for a moment, it feels as though the entire world has stopped, holding its breath in the face of this final moment. "Tell them to prepare," she says at last, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "We will make our stand at the keep. We will not surrender." Sir Alden bows low, though his expression falters for just a second. He knows what she does not want to admit. There is no chance of victory. The walls have fallen. The gates are gone, and the enemy is already flooding into the castle. The keep will be their last refuge, and even then, It is only a matter of time before they are overwhelmed. "My lady," Sir Alden says, his voice softer now, filled with the sorrow of a man who has followed her family for decades. "You cannot stand with them. You are the last of your house. You must save yourself." Isolde's gaze hardens, and she turns to face him, her eyes filled with fire that mirrors the one in his. "If I die, I will die with my people. We will die as we lived, with honor." She turns away from him then, walking slowly to the window that overlooks the courtyard. The distant sound of the enemy's drums grows louder, their war cries closer. The sky is darkening rapidly now, the last vestiges of daylight, giving way to nightfall, and she knows that this will be her last night to live free. The soldiers are gathering now, their faces set in grim determination. The courtyard, once a place of laughter and joy, is now a place of death. The gatehouse is already in flames, the heat rising to meet her as she steps onto the stone steps that lead to the inner keep. Her heart beats in time with the pounding of the siege engines, each thundering crash a reminder that her family's rule is coming to an end. As she enters the courtyard, she sees them, her people, her soldiers, her loyal men, gathered in silence. Their armor is dented and cracked, their swords heavy with the blood of those they have already slain. Their faces are lined with exhaustion, their eyes filled with resignation. And yet they stand, each one ready to die for her, for the last of the royal family. They do not speak. There is no need for words. The sound of the drums grows louder as the enemy approaches the gates. The final assault is about to begin. Isolde raises her sword, her grip steady despite the fear that gnaws at her insides. "We fight, my brothers," she says, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "We fight for our home, for our families, for our honor." The battle is swift, brutal, and savage. The enemy crashes against them like a tidal wave, and the walls that once promised safety are shattered by the onslaught. Isolde fights alongside her soldiers, her sword flashing in the dimming light. The clash of steel against steel, the screams of the dying, the crackle of fire, all become one. Her mind is a blur of movement, of heat and blood and pain. The world narrows to the rhythm of her breath and the strike of her blade. And then, as the final wave of enemies surges forward, she stands alone. Her sword is heavy, her body bruised and broken, but her resolve has never been stronger. She will not yield. She will not let her family's name fall without a fight. The enemy surrounds her. She raises her sword for one final strike. And then the world goes dark. The night presses in close to the castle's walls, an inky void that swallows the light of the stars and moon. The only sound that breaks the heavy silence is the distant thunder of siege engines, their massive stones thundering against the ancient stone walls with brutal rhythm. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke, a pungent mix of war and the approaching rain. The wind stirs the banners above the keep, once vibrant symbols of power and family, now tattered, their fabric hanging limply in defeat. Lord Aemon, the final heir to a long line of warriors, stands alone in the high tower of his family's castle. The stone beneath his boots is cold, the chill of the night creeping into his bones. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, where the dark clouds and approaching storm mirror the storm that rages within him. There is no salvation coming, no reinforcements on the way. The enemy has laid siege to the castle for weeks, their battering rams, siege towers, and trebuchets whittling away the once impenetrable walls, one stone at a time. The time for hope has passed. Soon, the gates will fall, and with them, the last remnants of his family's legacy. Aemon's heart aches as he surveys the land stretching out before him, lands that once teemed with life, with crops swaying in the breeze and villages bustling with the laughter of children. Now, everything is desolate, the fields scorched by the war, the villages abandoned, their homes nothing more than smoldering ruins. He feels the weight of his father's crown, still unplaced on his head, pressing down on him even though it is not there. The burden of leadership, of his family's legacy, has always been heavy, but now it feels unbearable. He is just a young man, still trying to find his place in the world, and yet the weight of centuries of history, of ancestral duty, now rests solely on his shoulders. His mind drifts back to his father, Duke Aldrich, a man whose wisdom and strength had shaped this castle into a fortress feared by enemies far and wide. His father had always told him, a man's worth is not measured by the battles he wins, but by the strength with which he endures when defeat is certain. But how does one endure when everything, his people, his home, his bloodline, is crumbling around him? How does one fight against the inevitable? Aemon clenches his fists, feeling the rough texture of the stone beneath his palms. His fingers ache as they grip the cold, unyielding surface. A bitter laugh escapes his lips. He is not a soldier like his father had been. His hands, once more accustomed to the careful wielding of diplomacy than the brutal swordplay of war, now feel foreign to him. He was never trained to lead in such a desperate moment. His mind had always been filled with dreams of a peaceful reign, of a future in which he would be a ruler of justice and prosperity. But this castle, this war, is a reminder that peace is a fragile thing, a fleeting dream that could be shattered in the blink of an eye. The soft sound of footsteps behind him breaks his reverie, and Aemon turns to see Lady Ellyra, his trusted advisor and confidant. She, too, has not slept for days. Her face is pale, her eyes ring with exhaustion, but there is a quiet strength about her that has not wavered since the siege began. She is a daughter of one of his father's closest allies, and her loyalty to the family runs deep. She is a strategist, a brilliant mind in a sea of soldiers, and she has been Aemon's guiding light in these dark days. "My lord," she says softly, her voice steady despite the weight of the world pressing down on them. "We've lost the west wall. The enemy is preparing to breach the inner gates." Aemon's heart tightens in his chest at the words. They've lost so much already, his knights, his soldiers, his people. Now, even the castle's defenses are failing. There is no way out. The enemy's numbers are too great, and his own forces too few. "How many do we have left?" he asks, though he knows the answer before she speaks it. "Less than 50, she replies, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Most of the men are wounded, and the rest are exhausted beyond measure. We cannot hold much longer." Aemon nods, feeling the darkness of despair creeping in like the chill of the night. He feels the sting of failure. Failure not just as a lord, but as a son, as a man. He had vowed to protect his people, to honor the legacy of his father, and now it is slipping through his fingers like sand. How can he stand before them and give orders when he knows the outcome is already sealed? "The gates will fall," Ellyra says, as though reading his thoughts. "And with them, the castle. We can either face them head-on, or we can surrender and spare our people the bloodshed. There is no glory left in this fight." Aemon turns his gaze back to the horizon, his eyes narrowing as the storm clouds gather in the distance. He can feel the tension in the air, the electric charge of an inevitable clash, as though the heavens themselves are holding their breath. There is no glory left, that much is true, but surrender is not an option for him. To surrender would be to dishonor his father, his family, his ancestors who fought and died for this land. It would mean the complete destruction of everything they had built. "No," Aemon says quietly, his voice firm despite the ache in his chest. "We fight. We hold the gates as long as we can. If we die on our feet, not on our knees." Lady Ellyra watches him silently for a moment, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. She knows the cost of this decision. She knows that the end will come swiftly and without mercy. Yet, despite it all, she does not argue. She has always believed in his strength, in his ability to lead, even when that leadership led them to the edge of destruction. As she turns to leave, Aemon's hand shoots out to stop her. She glances back, her face unreadable in the dim light. "Thank you," he says softly, his voice breaking for the briefest moment. "For everything." She bows her head, her lips forming a small, sad smile. "It is I who should thank you, my lord, for showing us what it means to fight, even when there is no hope left." With a final glance, she disappears into the shadows, leaving Aemon alone once again. The wind picks up, tugging at his cloak, and the first drops of rain begin to fall, cold and heavy. His breath catches in his throat, the cold biting into his skin. He steps away from the window, his footsteps slow, each one heavier than the last. His sword, once gleaming with the promise of victories to come, now hangs at his side like a burden he can no longer carry. In the courtyard below, the last of his soldiers prepare for the final assault. The men are worn and bloodied, their faces gone from hunger and fatigue. They stand in tight formation, their weapons raised, their eyes filled with the kind of resolve that only comes when one knows the end is near. There is no fear in their eyes, only a quiet acceptance of the fate that awaits them. Aemon strides into the courtyard, his resolve hardening with every step. The rain begins to pour in earnest, soaking his tunic and cloak, but he feels none of it. The cold, the fear, the exhaustion, none of it matters now. The castle will fall, his people will die, and he will go down with them. But in this moment, as he stands before his men, he feels the weight of duty lift from his shoulders, replaced by something greater. A sense of peace in knowing that he has fought for what is right, even when victory was never an option. "Prepare yourselves," he commands, his voice steady, unwavering. "We face the enemy with honor. We die as we live, together." The men give a low, unified cheer, their voices hoarse from days of battle. As the enemy approaches, their war cries filling the air, Aemon grips his sword tightly, ready to meet the end. The gates are already trembling under the weight of the battering ram, and the earth shakes beneath his feet. The final assault is upon them.